In her book, The Extended Mind, Annie Murphy Paul explores the power of thinking outside of the brain, how we use resources outside of our heads that help us to think better. In this video, I would like to sketch out some of my favorite ideas from the book, which is broken down into 3 sections, the first of which explores embodied cognition, how we think with our bodies, the second exploring situated cognition, how we think with our surroundings, and the third socially distributed cognition, how we think with our relationships. Let's start with embodied cognition. What Paul describes first in this section is how we can think with sensations by paying attention to how our body feels. That particular skill, that awareness of the inner state of your body, is called interoception. And it's a little bit like thinking of your body as radar, regularly monitoring what's going on inside of your body. What's interesting to note is that interoception is actually linked to high performance. One example given was stock traders, of all people. Those traders that were more in tune with their body made better trades. The explanation being that they were quicker to notice feelings of intuition in response to what was going on in the market. So this skill of interoception tends to be relevant in games or experiences that require noticing patterns, because often your body and unconscious mind notice a pattern before it enters your conscious awareness. So the more in tune you are with your body, the more likely you are to notice those signals. Interoception also plays a role in emotional regulation. When you pay attention to how your body is feeling, you're more able to go through this process of cognitive reappraisal, where you feel the feeling, name it, and then potentially reframe it, if the default interpretation isn't particularly constructive. Here, Paul also brings in the idea of shuttling, where you move your focus back and forth between what's happening inside of your body and what's going on outside of your body, and how beneficial it can be to regularly tune in to both of those sets of stimuli. You gain some understanding when you pay attention to what's going on outside of you, and then a different understanding when you listen to what's going on inside, which can give you a more holistic perspective on whatever's going on. Next, we turn to thinking with movement. We've got these bodies that are designed to move, and it turns out the more we incorporate movement into our days, the better we're able to think. One interesting example in this chapter is a treadmill desk, where you combine a standing desk with a treadmill so that you can get some work done, not just standing up instead of sitting down, but also moving. And as it turns out, that supports focus, particularly with visual tasks. As someone who enjoys getting out of the house and going on long walks, I was pulled to this idea right away and ended up getting a really simple treadmill that I placed up against a wall and added a shelf above it for a desk, and have gotten a lot of email and video editing and reading done while walking. And I've been surprised at how much cognitive momentum and even creative momentum can come from that relatively simple physical momentum, even though you're just walking in place. Another way that you can think with movement is by feeling abstract concepts. For example, in a physics class, getting a literal feel for torque by holding a bicycle wheel, getting it spinning, and then tilting the axle from horizontal to vertical and back. Actors also think with movement by connecting specific components of the staging of a scene to the lines that you need to memorize. This is called the enactment effect, where you connect specific movements to specific information that you'd like to recall. In this case, the lines that you need to recite. That's why some actors don't even start memorizing lines until the staging of the scene is in place. And it turns out you don't even need to get your entire body involved in the process. You can actually do quite a bit of thinking just with gesture. The use of hand gestures while talking or even just thinking has 3 benefits. It enhances your memory because of the fact that you're creating a stronger memory trace in your brain when you engage your body, your hands in particular in this case. It also provides the opportunity for some cognitive offloading. The gesture that you're making gives you a reference point to hold some of the information on what you're describing so that you don't have to keep all of that in memory. even if it's something as simple as reminding yourself that there are 3 main points that you're making. Right now you're on the second and you've got one more coming. They've also found that gestures help you work with abstract ideas because when you get your hands involved in the process, you intuitively start to create these representations that give some form to the ideas that you're working with. And one way that was described is as a virtual diagram, something that you create on the fly with your hands that provides an extra layer of context to the ideas that you are talking through or thinking through. Next, let's turn to situated cognition, which is all about thinking with our surroundings. One type of environment that supports good thinking is nature, which likely won't surprise you, but at the same time, I feel like nature is an underutilized resource when it comes to better thinking, better creative work, especially for those of us who live in an urban environment where it might be a little more challenging to get to natural spaces. But the benefits of spending time in nature include psychological renewal, the way in which nature helps us to relieve our stress and reestablish our mental equilibrium, both of which support better thinking, as does an increased level of focus that comes when spending time in nature. When out in nature, you're also more likely to experience awe, this feeling of amazement and wonder that often comes along with nature's vastness, like the unfathomable scale of the ocean, of the mountains, of the night sky, to quote Paul. When experiencing awe, we become less reliant on preconceived notions and stereotypes. We become more curious and open-minded, and more willing to revise and update our mental schemas, the templates we use to understand ourselves and the world. We also are more creative in nature. We engage in more imaginative play. We're more receptive to unexpected connections and insights, and we tend to let our mind wander and follow our thoughts wherever they lead. As great as natural spaces are, it turns out that human-built spaces also provide some benefits as well. Even something as simple as a wall, because when walls are put up that separate you from the potential noise and stimuli and other people outside of those walls, that actually reduces your cognitive load so that you can bring more focus and attention to the task at hand. The privacy that comes within a walled space also has the benefit of giving you more freedom to experiment in ways that you wouldn't if you knew that someone could walk by and take a look at what you were working on. And within a space that you have designed, there's also this home advantage. There are positive psychological benefits when you're in a space that feels like your own, that has reminders of your identity, your goals, and your values. That home advantage leads you to feeling more confident and capable. It also makes you more efficient and productive. Paul points out here that it's not about spending all of your time in this private, isolated space, instead suggesting intermittent collaboration, where you cycle back and forth between some sociable interaction and some quiet focus time. Next, we move to thinking with the space of ideas, which was one of my favorite sections because it speaks the most directly to my interest in sketching out ideas. The benefit of creating artifacts that you can work with, that you can move around as you're thinking through or working through a set of ideas. So when you choose to sketch out ideas, maybe even using post-it notes that you can move around on the wall, you get the benefit of cognitive offloading because you're creating this external representation of a thought that you don't have to hold in your mind, a benefit that we also saw of thinking with gesture. You also get this really interesting back talk of sketches. When you give an idea some visual form on the page, it will talk back to you and prompt ideas for where you might go next. Or maybe even show you that that representation isn't quite right. So you iterate on it and try something different. It gives you something to respond to as opposed to just kind of running in circles inside your own brain. And with the use of something like sticky notes or index cards, you also have this interactivity. You can literally move the ideas around on your desk or on the wall, try out different combinations, different ways of structuring and organizing those ideas as you build up a map of the concepts that you're working with. that shows which ideas are related to each other, which are different, how they're connected. And if you're working large scale enough, you can also tap into the benefit of physically navigating those ideas, moving left to right along the wall, looking at those ideas from a different perspective, which helps to tap into your spatial reasoning skills. So this particular technique of thinking with the space of ideas is one that I like to apply when wrapping my head around a book, as you're seeing here, both so that I can better understand the set of ideas that I just read, but perhaps more importantly, making that transition from understanding a set of ideas to putting them into action in my day-to-day life. And in the case of this particular visual book summary, it's about creating a resource that I can look back on whenever I feel stuck in my own head and would benefit from thinking outside of my brain using one of these techniques, including perhaps one from the final section here on socially distributed cognition, which is all about thinking with relationships, such as thinking with experts, tapping into the knowledge of others, of people who have much more experience in the current field you're thinking about or working on, so that you can learn from that experience. An example that came to mind for me, perhaps a cliche, was the ability to break a board by punching through it. In a karate class, the way that we learn from experts is through imitation, which sometimes gets a bad rap. Paul references the cult of originality that we're sometimes exposed to, where it's all about coming up with your own ideas, being completely original. But in many areas of performance, imitation is often the most efficient and effective route to success, where you're able to learn from both the successes and the failures of people who have come before you. The thing you must watch out for, though, is the correspondence problem. The fact that there are likely differences in your particular situation compared to the one that you're imitating. In this board breaking analogy, maybe the material of the board that you're trying to break is different from the example that you're imitating. So the key to successful imitation is to spend enough time understanding why someone else's solution is successful, and then identify how your own circumstances are a little bit different than that example, and figure out how to adapt the original solution to your situation. But experts aren't the only folks that you can learn from. Your peers are a great resource as well. In the book, an example was given about graduate students in the sciences and how the development of particular skills, like generating hypotheses, designing experiments, and analyzing data, was more closely related to their engagement with other students in the lab and not so much the guidance they received from faculty members. One of the things going on here is what's called the social encoding advantage, that we actually remember social information more accurately than information taken in a solitary environment. Thinking with your peers is also a way to avoid confirmation bias by arguing together with the aim of arriving jointly at something close to the truth, where you fight over ideas with mutual respect, which helps you be more productive and creative in your thoughts, and also helps you to make better arguments. Another benefit of learning within a peer group is this idea of cascading mentorship, where the participants in that group both teach and are taught. Peer tutoring has great benefits because for the peer teacher, the simple act of teaching will change the way you think and lead to a better, deeper understanding when you're forced to communicate a concept to someone else. And for the person on the receiving end, it's often going to be more helpful to hear what someone who is closer to your level of understanding, to hear their take on a concept, compared to the instructor who might have too much expertise and who has forgotten what it was like to first learn that material. We then move from thinking with peers to the more general act of thinking with groups, where we can benefit from shared attention when we focus on the same objects or information at the same time as others. This is a similar idea to the social encoding advantage, where we learn better, remember better, and are more likely to act on information that has been attended to along with other people. When working in a group, there's also shared motivation, where group membership itself acts as a form of intrinsic motivation. which is a nice contrast to how we commonly think about motivation as something that has to come from us as an individual. It's kind of refreshing and encouraging that motivation can actually be shared and almost distributed in a group environment where those benefits can actually be amplified through behavioral synchrony. Something as simple as a synchronized exercise, where coordinating your actions, including your physical movements, so that they are like the actions of others, actually primes you for what Paul calls cognitive synchrony. Multiple people thinking together efficiently and effectively. That behavioral synchrony helps each individual flip the switch from a focus on I to a focus on we. When thinking in a group, you can also tap into the benefit of transactive memory, where instead of one person having to remember everything, that task of knowing and remembering can be distributed among the members to create a more versatile whole, where certain people might be responsible for knowing certain things. And Paul points out here that while groupthink gets a bad rap, rightly so if it describes uncritical group thinking, it's also worth recognizing that cognitive individualism also has its limitations, and that there are plenty of ways to successfully and efficiently think within a group. So what you see here are 9 different ways that you can think outside of the brain. And really, I've just scratched the surface on each of those 9. I do encourage you to pick up the book for more examples and techniques within each of these categories. But in general, I hope that you've seen here the variety of resources that you can tap into when you feel like your own thinking isn't getting you anywhere. Any one of these techniques for getting out of your head will likely lead to some insight. If you found this particular technique of sketching out ideas to be interesting and useful, then check out the resources that I have developed at verbaltovisual.com, which is where I teach this skill. There you can tap into some self-paced online courses, as well as live events that build in some socially distributed cognition, where you'll be able to think with your peers to better make sense of this skill set and see the interesting things that other people are doing with it. And one particular style of live learning experience that I'm excited about right now is a sketchnote book club, where we gather together to read an interesting book while learning how to sketchnote it. In November, that book will be The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness by Morgan Housel. So if you'd like to dig into those ideas in a group setting while learning how to sketch them out, then I encourage you to come join us. I will share links to that resource and others down below this video. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck tapping into these extensions as needed, and I look forward to sharing another visual book summary with you soon. Till next time.